What's up guys, in this video I want to talk a bit about bevels and game assets. Now bevels are incredibly important in game assets because it gives you that really nice reflection on the edges. So there are three different ways that we can actually use bevels inside of our hard surface meshes. So what I have here are three different cubes. I'm going to show you the difference between them. This one is the default cube with auto smooth turned off. This one is the default cube with auto smooth turned on to make it nice and sharp. And this one is the default cube with a single segment bevel with a weighted normal modifier applied to it. Now you're probably wondering why exactly I'm pointing this out, and you're going to see in just a second. So I want to quickly bring up this high poly cube I have right here. So this is the default cube with a 3-segment bevel with a weighted normal turned on as well. And you can kind of see this one has a nice reflection, as does this one, whereas these two do not. So we have a few options when we're making game assets. We can either take our high poly guide mesh and bake the bevels onto a surface with hard edges, meaning no bevel, or what we can do is take the high poly guide mesh and simply bake the bevels onto a lower poly that only has a 1-segment bevel. The reason we want to use a 1-segment bevel is because it's significantly less hefty on the scene, meaning the poly count is going to be way lower. This cube, for example, if you take a look at the bottom right, if I were to apply the bevel and weighted normal here, you can see this one has 44 tries, while this one here has 188 tries. Now, when using cubes as an example, it doesn't really matter because cubes are so low res, who cares, right? But when we use much higher quality models, when we have a really complex mesh, that poly count is really going to add up. So we have a few options. We can either, on our low poly mesh, use a 0-segment bevel, so basically no bevel at all, or we can use a 1-segment bevel, which is going to be a bit higher in poly count, but nowhere near the poly count that a 3-segment is going to have. Now there are so many different strategies here that it just depends on who you ask and the requirements that you give to yourself, or maybe if you're working for a game developer that they give to you. Whatever it is, there's no right or wrong answer here. My preferred way of working is to take a little bit higher poly count but have a cleaner mesh. And the best way to get the cleanest result at a very optimal poly count is to use the 1-segment bevel strategy with face weighted normals. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the issue with baked bevels, and I'm going to show you why this strategy with 1-segment is a lot more practical. So here's strategy 1. You have a low poly mesh with no bevels, right? And you don't have auto smooth turned on at all, so the shading kind of goes ballistic. And I'm going to show you what the result of this one with this baked onto it will look like. Before we do that, we have to unwrap our low poly mesh every single time if we want to use this in Substance or some sort of texturing software. So press U. For this example, I can simply use a Smart UV project. It's not going to be a big deal. And now this is very important. Make sure your island margin is above 0, so that way you don't get any sort of bleeding issues and textures. This way you have a little bit of space between each of the islands. If this is set to 0, let me show you. You're going to see that there is no space between each of the island margins. It's just completely connected. Whereas if we unwrap set to something like 0.03, we have a little bit of space. And this is very important if you want to have a clean result inside of your texturing software. Aside from that, what I'm going to do is simply export this cube. So what I like to do is name my objects with the base name with _low and _high appended to it. So for example, this one would be cube _low, and this one would be cube _high. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and export both the cube _low and cube _high and bring it into Substance to show you the issue when we try to bake it. Now I went ahead and did the baking off camera, but don't worry, we will be discussing baking in the course. I promise you, one of the most important things we're going to discuss. So from a distance it looks fine, right? But when you zoom in and when you get up close to the model, we have this terrible result. We have the bevel baked onto it. You can see the bevel, but we also have that very visible hard edge, and that is the issue with hard edges. And this is why we'll be using 1-segment bevels in the course, because they're just going to look a lot better overall, and we're not going to have this hard edge effect. The reason this effect is so visible is simply because whenever you bake normal maps, you want to make sure your normal map curvature matches the curvature, or I'm sorry, you want to make sure the high poly curvature matches the low poly curvature, which is going to give you a much cleaner bake. The best way to get clean normal map bakes is to make sure the curvature is in pretty much the same place, as close as you can get. That's why when you have details that are so far off from the base mesh that the bakes become pretty erratic and you don't get good results. And this is a very clear example of that happening. The hard edge simply does not match the curvature enough to get rid of that nasty hard edge effect. So this is really all up to your opinion if you want to use this, maybe for like a background asset that you really don't need for a hefty scene. Sure, you could probably use this. If you won't be up close to it, you probably won't see that issue, but there are also a lot of models that you will go up close to, and this is going to be very visible. So I just showed you the result with the badly shaded cube, and I haven't showed you the result for this one yet. And I'm not going to actually do it again because these two after the bake will look exactly the same. So this right here is what I just showed you in Substance. This is going to give you the same exact result in Substance, believe it or not. I kind of wanted to hammer on this point in this video just because it doesn't really matter if you bake with auto smooth turned off or auto smooth turned on. Generally you're going to get pretty similar results. Some people plead by using this strategy with auto smooth turned off before you bake. Some people use the auto smooth turned on strategy before their bake. Honestly, I've never really seen a massive difference between the two. Oftentimes I found this is a little bit better in terms of results. So if you want to bake a hard edge, I would usually turn off the auto smooth option in here. Anyways, now we need to discuss the single segment bevel strategy. So let's go ahead and unwrap this cube again, the same exact way we did before. I would always use a small island margin, maybe like 0.03, to avoid any potential texture bleeding. And we'll click on the OK button, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this into Substance and bake it and show you how much better this result will look. And here's the result with the single segment bevel with the high poly baked onto it. Oftentimes you're not going to see a huge difference with the 3-segment bevel getting baked onto the 1-segment bevel. It's not going to be too much of a difference, and you can see that if I remove the normal map here, it doesn't really change too much, but yeah, I did want to show you that just to kind of emphasize the point. The main reason for using normal maps is to bake in detail, not the bevels. So the only time you'll use a baked bevel in a practical sense is if you're using the hard edge strategy like I showed you. Otherwise, the single segment baked from a 3-segment is not going to be too much of a difference. And this is a much better solution because not only do we not have those hard edges in the middle over the bake, we have a really nice reflection that's a lot better than the result we had before. This actually looks like a bevel no matter where we go, no matter what angle we're at. We can easily see there's definitely a bevel here, and there is no sort of hard edge getting in the way. So this is the reason we want to use our single segment bevel strategy. Although the poly count will be a bit higher, in my opinion it is definitely worth it because modern game engines are meant to handle a little bit higher poly counts. So unless it's like a filler asset in the background that's so far away, I don't think using the hard edge strategy is ever worth it because the detail is just really bad. So this is always the solution I would go with for your game assets.